I know, I love actually putting on like a pants or a long sleeve. There's a point at which I can't take off any more clothes. So today we'll use stability ball if you have it. If you don't, you could substitute yoga block or a foam roller. And then foam roller. And then yoga block or foam cushion, we're gonna do a little balancing work. So you can also ditch that completely or fold the mat. So a couple options with that. Yeah. Yeah, the cushy ones can be a little harder. So let's start standing. And let's just do a quick little kind of like moving around. So we'll start with a little standing rotation, just letting everything twist, ankles, knees, hips, ribs, shoulders, head, noticing that your neck can also turn. When you use your eyes, you'll notice you get a little bit more rotation out of your cervical spine and your thoracic spine. So it's kind of a fun feature. Try one more each way, checking in with the breath here. And then kind of settling down. We'll do some little wrist rolls so you can bring your hands together. Little figure 8, just resting your elbows. I'm just gonna okay, fix that. How's that sound? Nice. Yeah, we lost power for a second there. Let's do one more roll down like this. So again, keeping the weight even between the front and the back of the foot. So this is going to encourage all of the hip muscles and the leg muscles to work three-dimensionally when we have centered weight. It also means that we're loading, when we're loading in the center, it means we've got this better stack of our pelvis and our rib cage and our head. So it also kind of takes tension out of the low back. So with that stack in mind, we're going to grab our roller if we need it for balance assist. We can do this without balance, without the foam roller as well. For extra excitement and fun, yoga block or your foam cushion. You could also do this on the ground. I'm going to take the yoga block. And the reason I kind of like the block or the foam cushion is it's a little more unstable, right? So it's a little harder. So to make it easier, you can always go to the floor. I'm going to step on my yoga block or keep my supporting side as my left leg. And I'm just going to kind of stand for a moment. And then this also lets me relax this leg. So I've got a little bit of height. So as you're standing here, just noticing, where's the weight in the foot? So like a little bit of give in the ankle, right? Kind of supination, pronation, rolling and rolling out. Can I find that weight centered? Should feel like my spine's pretty stacked. And then just gently, can I reach that leg forward? Can I reach that leg back? And the whole goal as we're kind of moving this leg, this is a distraction, right? It's what do I have to do adjustment wise in my supporting hip, supporting inner thigh, calf and ankle to stabilize. When I change the lever, so when my leg is reaching front to back, right? If I'm going front to back here, I have to make a subtle adjustment in my weight to find that balance. Do we feel some work in the supporting hip?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I love opposite hand on the support system. So if I've got a wall or a chair, and the reason is it gives me a little bit more feedback into my obliques. And then let's give that leg a little break for a moment. Yeah, waking up our stabilizers. Try the other side. So we'll switch the roller to the opposite side. Again, you can do this without being on an unstable surface. Right, turning it up again would be something like the Bosu or a stability cushion, a lot more wobble. We're trying to tune into kind of those micro adjustments and noticing that we're asymmetrical for the most part. So we might have a different habit from side to side. In one direction might be more challenging. Neutral pelvis, right? When we're in a tuck, it's really hard to adjust for any change in the lever. So if I'm like really tucked under, I've kind of lost all of my support muscles. I'm just breathing. And maybe you go no hands, right? We make it harder, we let go. Torso kind of comes into play a little bit more when we don't have our hands on something. And then take a little rest again. I'm gonna this time keep my roller on the same side. So left side, left foot comes back on my block or my foam roller. I'm gonna stand on that side. So what I'm gonna do is do a little float. I wanna find not my waist, but I wanna find actually where my thigh bone is kind of in my hip joint. So you'll feel that crease kind of where like a swimsuit line would be. And I'm just gonna do a little reach out and back in. So the movement happens a lot lower. For a lot of us, I think we imagine, okay, it's gonna be my side body that does the work. The more you push through your supporting leg, it's gonna give you a little bit more power to reach that leg away from you. Abduction is one of the hardest ranges to do, right? It's the most work. That limb's away from our midline. What are kind of the adjustments that you might try to do? Maybe hiking, maybe leaning. It's a lot of outer hip and inner thigh to stabilize. Just trying to keep that trunk not only stacked forward, but keeping it from side bending or rotating. So this is oblique work too. And so how much work you feel in your supporting leg, that's kind of what we want our leg to be doing when it's holding us up all the time, which we know it's not always doing, right? Joint stack is definitely something that is easy to fall into. And then take a little rest here, shake it out. We feel some work through that leg. Yeah, outer hip, nice. And depending, it's like maybe you'll feel more ankle stability on one side, more outer hip. If the toes are clenching, we'll go to the opposite side here. So same arm on your support system or hand-free. Find that crease. So kind of right at the side where a swimsuit line would be. And then you're gonna reach out. Yeah, and depending on mobility, you might find you have different range from side to side. If you start to turn the leg out, that's telling me you're working the front of the hip a little bit. So do try to keep those hips square. You can think about if you're tracing your heel on a wall behind you, just gently. Yeah, and there's, in theory, right, there's nothing wrong with joint stack as long as we can come out of it. So as long as we have the strength and the mobility to move through multiple ranges. A lot of activation here. Yeah, maybe no hands for a little more excitement. To make it more supportive, hands, and maybe a more stable surface. So just try one more like this. And then, woo, nice. Yeah, shake it off. So that's our side leg series, right? So when we're actually doing this on our sides, that's the work. So it gives us a good sense of kind of how much work our supporting side needs to do. Let's keep our block. We're gonna come down to hands and knees for this next section. And we'll play with, if you need to pad the knees, feel free. We'll play with a little kind of push out of the upper body. So I've got my block or my cushion. You can also do this without anything. And I'm gonna place my hand on my block. So I'm in my hands and knees position. So you can see me. And I'm just gonna practice pushing with my arms, I'm really grounding down from the hand all the way to the shoulder. And I'm just gonna lift enough that my left hand can come off. And then I'm gonna slowly lower and put it back down. So shoulder blade moving here. It's okay if you get a little bit of a rotation, just focusing on really actively engaging from the finger pads all the way up, spiraling up into underneath the shoulders. We got this nice support under versus on the top of our shoulder. So that kind of pressing out, you might feel like a little more tricep in this variation. That pressing out is what we want to feel when we're doing any of our hands and knees stuff. So lots of work to press out of the ground. Try just one more like this. Yeah, really nice. And then try the other side. You can just bump that block over, right? We can do this without the block. We've got our left hand is our pusher here. So I'm really pushing out so much that that arm just gently kind of floats off, and then I'm controlling the return back down. So do you feel how much power this requires? Right, so the kind of the thing we want to watch out for is if I'm just collapsing and just lifting this hand. So there's no change, right? What I want to do is I want to really go, okay, can I push? It's growing energetically out and then coming back down. And that's where sometimes we lose the connection between kind of shoulder blade and the connection with the ground when we're doing anything quadruped, plank related. Just try one more like this. Yeah, so it's allowing the shoulder blade to move, to giving it permission to move. So you can set your block off to the side, come back to that hands and knees position, and then try finding that same energy of pushing out. We're just gonna do the arms for your bird dog. So I'm pushing out on the right hand so much that I can just float that arm forward. And then I'm gonna come back in, try the other side, pushing out as much as I can to float. It's a lot of work, right? A lot of isometric. So there's never really a break of pushing out. So I'm pushing out just as much when that arm returns as when I initially sweep the arm forward. Can you give permission for your shoulder blade to mobilize when you press away? So I'm allowing my armpit of the arm that's lifting to really rotate, creating space between my hips and my ribs. Let's just try one more each way. Should feel like the shoulder getting warm here. Nice, and we'll give those guys a little break. You can cross your ankles. Roll onto the bum here. So a little shoulder work today. Grab your block or your ball. We're gonna put this guy in between the thighs. And we'll play with a little bit more shoulder work. So let's go into a half roll back. So I'm sitting up nice and tall. We're gonna roll back just off the sits bones. So I'm thinking of flipping my pelvis. Got that ball to assist me here as I exhale to curl forward. Find my tailbone and then just lengthen my spine up nice and tall. So the pelvis rolls, right? And then it's gonna keep this same position. It's my spine keeping the curl. So I've got like a little extra crunch there as I roll forward. And then just gently stacking back up. Right? You could always sit on a block or a foam pad if you need a little bit more height. You can also move your feet a little further away here. So we should start to feel like, okay, inner thighs that I felt in my balance work, outer hip, a little bit of core, just one more like this. Just moving the pelvis away from the thighs here. Okay, now we're gonna add the arms. So we'll sweep the arms forward. You're gonna roll back, maybe not your deepest place, but pause for a moment. Can you allow your armpit to open and reach one arm up? And then bring that arm back down, squeezing that ball as you exhale and sweep that opposite arm up. So as we're moving here, we have to give permission, not to the rib cage, but to the shoulder blade that we just worked. Should feel like a ton more core when we allow, yeah, nice. And it's really like fascially, it's all of this gets to move. So you're giving permission for everything to lengthen versus kind of locking and compressing and trying to just move here. Let the whole thing lengthen. Do you feel more core like that? Yeah, nice, one more each way. Like giving permission for it to lengthen. Always harder when abs are on lengthened. And then you can roll all the way down here and pull your feet a little bit closer to your bum. All right, so a little shoulder bridge. So similar articulation to what you just did. We're gonna peel the spine off the mat. So easy articulation, floating the hips. We're gonna watch we don't go so high that we're sitting in the neck, but think kind of base the shoulder blades since we're getting to know them well today, and then lengthen and lower all the way back down. Hands can be down. If you tend to tense a lot in your lats and your shoulders, maybe arms to the ceiling. And here's all the same kind of muscle groups that we're using in even our shoulder bridge that we used in our standing leg balance. So here's my inner thigh and my outer hip, which is really responsible for stabilizing that supporting leg in any of our balance work, right? It's kind of what's responsible for directing the knee over the toes. And just nice smooth breath here. We're gonna hold up at the top on the next one. And then pause here, just my right arm, so everything stays stable in my pelvis and my spine, just my right arm opens to the side to a hover, and then bring that arm back up. And then we'll try the left side. So again, allowing the shoulder blade to lead the motion. You can think of like a clasp behind your shoulder blades, and it's just gently pulling the arm open so that your pec gets to release, bicep gets to lengthen. We'll try one more each way here. Checking in with the hips, noticing if we've gotten into like a little bit of an arch in the back. And then on this last one, reach your arms overhead, just let them rest on the ground, and then try to melt all the way down through the spine. Okay, we'll turn on the core a little bit here. So I'm gonna come into my imprint position, right? That's my obliques drawing my ribs and hips together. I'm gonna float one leg to tabletop. I'm gonna float my second leg to tabletop. Bring your legs all the way together. You're gonna take your ball and you're gonna press your ball onto your thighs. So even though it's my thighs and my hands pressing into the ball, can you press from your core? So rather than kind of burning out my arms or my quads, I'm thinking of creating tension by using my abs. So hips and ribs are kind of squeezing together here. I wanna keep my back connected on the ground. So once I found this ab work, we're gonna go into a bird dog variation. We're gonna start just with the arms. So my right arm is gonna reach overhead. I'm allowing the shoulder blade to move, right, and the side body to lengthen, and then I'm gonna come back in and switch sides. So as you're squeezing, you'll notice the work increases the further the limb is from center. Can you keep the back in a good place while still giving permission for that side to lengthen? So there's this nice element of like the armpits opening, kind of stretching that fascia from my hips to my ribs, all while the core is having to stabilize. If this is feeling groovy, on the next one, you can add your opposite leg in a reach. So my opposite leg can reach out. The lower that leg goes, the more low core. So just be conscientious. Maybe it's just a tiny reach away where that thigh is just moving a little bit away from center. Maybe it's a full extension. You can choose your height. Right, lower is going to definitely be a little more pull into the low back, so just be conscientious of that. Can you keep the length, or did you notice that you started to kind of lock in the side body? And we'll just do one more each way. Lots of ab here. Exhaling to extend. Last one. And then you can gently lower one leg down and your second leg down. Nice, walk your feet a little wider. And then just a gentle windshield wiper, just letting your knees fall into internal and external rotation. Do we feel some core there? What's cool is the more that we practice lengthening the side body and allowing the shoulder blades to move, we'll get more ab, which is always exciting. Suddenly we've turned on a little bit more core, but really functional, because we don't want to only be able to activate our core in a compressive state. We also want to be able to support when we're lengthening, right? That's really functional kind of in the real world. On the next one, we'll lift the hips here. If you have the ball, you can take the ball and put it under the bum, right? Again, you can do this without the ball under the bum. We're adding a little instability, so we're getting a little bit more feedback, but you can still do your toe taps without the ball. Slightly biased towards an imprint. So you're imprinted if you don't have the ball, you're gonna kind of bias towards that imprint if you do. Try a leg lift and then lower that leg, and then try the opposite side. And you're just noticing, okay, there's a little instability. Can I keep from popping my ribs, my abs, or my back? And if the answer is yes, maybe you float both legs up and you take your toe taps here. So every time I'm tapping down, I want to be really mindful of not letting the back arch, the ribs pop, right, or splay. Maybe I reach the arms up for a little bit more excitement, right, a little more instability. Maybe I keep my arms down. Just know more surface area is going to be a little bit more supportive for your nervous system, but also more stable because you've got more surface area on the ground. If this feels good and you want to make it harder, you can extend one leg out. So you're going into a single leg stretch, right? A little bit more load in the core, a little longer lever. Can you keep the stability of the supporting side? If you want more still, you could pull your arms by your ears. So now I'm just challenging the upper abs as well with the arms hovering. And we'll just try 4 more like this. Still breathing. Yeah. Nice. Yay for instability, right? All those little stabilizers. You can hug your legs here and then just carefully let one leg come down. Second leg, just making sure core still on. Lift the hips. We'll exchange that. So now we'll have the ball in between the thighs again. We'll do a little twist. So with our twist, either keeping the toes connected to the ground, so we've got a little bit more support, or coming back into that imprint, you're going to lift the heels, drag the toes to the bum, and just gently float the legs to tabletop. Arms can be out in a T. We're just going to let that top hip lift as the hips rotate to one side. Opposite shoulder stays down. Use your inner thighs and your low core to draw the legs back up. So I don't shear in my pelvis. I'm going to let that top hip lift and rotate. I have to lengthen through my side body. If I don't, I'm not going to get very far without wrenching. I'm going to exhale to float back up. And try that just a couple more times. So allowing the armpit to open, right? So you're connecting this into the shoulder blade work and then exhaling to come back in. Kind of a tricky line between arching and allowing length. So we want to make sure we're allowing the shoulder blade to move without arching through the low back. An easy breath here. We're just going to take one more each way. So evening yourself out. Got my last one here. And then you can carefully lower those legs back down. We'll keep the ball in between the thighs. We'll cross the hands behind the head. We're going to come up for a little imprint crunch excitement. So I'm still in my imprint. I'm going to exhale to nod my chin before I lift the head and shoulders. I'm going to reach for the backs of my legs. Take a breath in and exhale, pull a little higher. Take a breath in here. You're going to exhale, keep your height as you reach your hands behind your head. And then can you lengthen to lower back down? So maybe take like 2 counts to lower. And we'll just do like 5 more of those. So exhaling to lift. Inhale, exhale, squeeze that ball, pull yourself a little higher. Take a breath in. Can you keep this? Reach those arms back behind your head. Can you lengthen and create more space between your hips and your armpits? Exhaling to lift. Inhale, I got those inner thighs working. You can use your biceps to pull up a little higher. Keep the height. And then lengthening back down. Yeah, so almost the lower will feel just as challenging as that hold situation. You got 3 more. Exhale to lift. Inhale, if you want to make this harder, you can sweep your arms really wide and then lengthen back down, right? So the further the arms are from center, the more challenging it's going to be on the core. Last 2. Exhaling to lift. Inhale and exhale to pull. Keep that height as you sweep. Really support the head here, especially as you get tired. Let your middle back do the work. Last one. Exhaling to lift. Sweeping those arms and exhaling, curling a little higher. Reaching those arms back around and lowering all the way back down. Nice. You can let your legs take a little wiggle from side to side here. We'll counter that with a little hip extension. So you can drop the ball. You're going to put your feet on the ball. So a little squishy, right? If you don't have the ball, you can definitely use foam roller. Yoga block's also nice because it just gives you a little bit more height. You can always do this without. Find a little bit of a press down into the ball so that you're feeling your hamstrings and your glutes. right? Heels closer, definitely more lower hamstring and a little more bum support. And then see if you can just lift your hips up, little shoulder bridge here, as if you got karate chopped at the front of the hips, setting the bum back down. Not going to be as high as your regular shoulder bridge, right? You'll notice you're a little restricted in terms of height. So only going to as high as you feel like you can keep your ribs in a good place. Exhaling to lift, nice little breath in, and then exhaling to lower back down. We'll just do 2 more like that. So keeping an eye on the ribs. Can you keep that kind of plank position? So if you had your thumbs on your ribs and your pinkies on your hips, you've got the same amount of space in both directions. So when I'm up and when I'm down, so just watching for that splay. On the next one, we're not going to go quite as high. We're actually going to butterfly the legs out and in with our feet on the ball. So we'll go maybe like 3 inches, not your max height, but 3 inches off, keeping that plank position, opening the legs and closing the legs. So can you allow, with a neutral pelvis still, your thighs to open and close? So giving them permission to rotate. Maybe elbows on the ground for a little bit more challenge, maybe arms to the ceiling. Can the ribs be easy? Quite a bit, right? Especially back of the knee. Try 2 more here. Last one. And rest the bum down. You can lengthen the legs in and out a couple times. Yeah, definitely not a part of the hamstrings that we use a lot. So anytime you're bending your knee when you're bringing your foot to your bum, that's that hamstring. So it's that range of knee flexion. We tend to do a lot more upper hamstring. So let's go to left foot on the ball. We're gonna do a little oblique work. So you have a couple options. You can always bend the left leg in if that feels better in the low back, right? Bent leg's a great option. I'm gonna show long-legged. And the reason is I really like that you can kick your glute on. So just by pressing gently, you don't have to crush the ball, but flexing the foot, getting the quad on, finding a little bit of glute, want to make sure it doesn't go into the back, but just kind of reaching that left leg nice and long, keeping it active. We're going to bring the right leg into tabletop. You can always set this leg down if you need a little rest. Clasp your hands behind your head. We're going to go for 6 crunches. So I'm in my imprint position. I'm going to rotate as I exhale, bring my left elbow to my right inner thigh, and then I'm going to lengthen and lower back down. Now, you don't actually have to tap it. Some of this is going to be like an anatomical length of pieces. I've got a pretty short torso, so I might be a little closer than some. Don't worry about the actual tap. As you rotate, can you keep your right shoulder blade and elbow off of the mat? Can you keep reaching this hip long? So does the left hip start to kind of curl in? Use the lengthening of that left leg to propel you into the twist. So I'm going to kick through my heel, really lengthen as I twist. And you get just 1 more like this. Exhaling, rotating. Lovely. And then take that hand behind your, both hands rather, behind your right thigh. We're going to pull the knee in, little knee pumps. Now for hamstring length, you could point or you could flex. It's going to be the same. So you might find that one position feels better. Flexing the foot can be really nice for the nerve stretch element. So it can feel a little bit tighter here. This is a great one if you've got sciatica. Pointing the toes can be nice if the top of the foot just needs a little stretch. So feel free to play in between. I'm trying to keep my thigh still in space. Let me know if you don't feel a stretch here. Playing with pointing and flexing, maybe doing some little ankle mobilizations, right? Crunching the toes. As we know, ankle mobility and hip mobility are super tightly connected. So if I'm missing mobility in part of my ankle joint, it could be affecting kind of that range in the hip. So it's always a good thing to check out. Make sure you mobilize your feet. And so with this, we're going to go into a 1-leg circle. You can keep your leg bent. If you need support, you could always grab a band and tie it around the thigh. Bent or lengthened. What I'm most interested in is no clicking in the hip and keeping the torso nice and still. So my arms can come out to the side or come up to the ceiling for more work. I'm gonna cross that thigh over my midline. Here's where I reach like crazy out of my left leg, and I'm gonna bring that thigh all the way back around. So adjust your range of motion, right? Smaller range, slower circles, that can be really helpful. If you wanna make it harder, bigger range, maybe a little bit faster. The idea is I want my thigh to be able to just sit in my hip socket and circle without my whole body following it, right? We want to have autonomy of the thigh. And then on this next one, let's reverse it. Inhaling and exhaling. If you notice like, oh, my neck is really doing all of the work here, then kind of take it down a notch. Find core, find supporting hips. Make your circles a little smaller and a little more supportive. We'll just do one more like this. Lovely. And then you can take a little rest for a moment. We're gonna do one more ab thing before we switch sides. So for this one, we'll clasp the hands, maybe the odd way, behind the head. Coming back into that imprint position. And I'm just gonna bring my right leg to tabletop. All I'm gonna do is a bicycle with my left leg. So I'm just pulling my left leg in and out. So every time I bring my left knee in, I'm gonna curl up into a crunch. Exhaling, pulling that knee in, lengthening as I lower the head and shoulders down. So kind of a similar idea. I'm having to support my core as I'm lengthening away. So challenging on both ends of my imprint. I can always lower this leg if I need a little bit more support. How do I allow my fascia, my shoulder blades to move so my lats aren't just compressing the whole time, but support the back as I lengthen? This idea of we find more stability when we find width and length. So if I can really reach away, kind of with intention, I should feel pretty supported. If you want to make this a little harder for the last 6, you're going to lengthen that right leg away as you curl up. Now you get to choose your height. So it could be a little higher, could also be a little lower. It's definitely a little more glute and hamstring when that leg is low. You're halfway here, you got 3 more. A little more hip flexor when that right leg's higher. So kind of notice what maybe is a bigger challenge for you or feels more supportive. And then rest your head. You can let that foot come off the ball for a moment. Pull that right knee into your chest, give it a nice little squeeze here. We'll take this into a twist. So you can either let the right leg cross all the way over, little twist. If that feels like too much in the low back, you can also stack your knees. So if SI is not feeling super happy with that one. Nice work, you guys. We feel some abs? Obliques on stretch. And then gently rolling all the way back. We get to do that entire thing on the other side. So I know it's like, where did we start? So we're gonna start with the right leg out on the ball, right? You have the option to bend it in if you need for any of these for more support in the back. When it's long, see if you can find your glute, not by forcing kind of through the low back, but just finding a little bum, little activation through the ball there, reaching that leg nice and far. We're gonna clasp the hands behind the head. Left leg comes to tabletop. I'm in my imprint position. We got 6 of these. We're gonna curl up and rotate. So as I rotate, I'm thinking about staying even through my hips, right? Versus kind of just leaning into that left side. And I wanna make sure that I'm not resting the left elbow or shoulder on the ground. Exhaling to rotate. I may or may not touch the thigh, that's totally fine. If you find your right leg wants to kind of come up, see if you can use the length through that right leg to assist in the rotation. 2 more. And last one, supporting the head, really nodding the chin before you lift. Lovely. Yeah, nice. Then you can clasp the hands behind, maybe again, the odd way. With that length through the right side, try your knee pumps here. So again, maybe it's flexed, maybe it's pointed. You might find you need something a little different on one side or the other. Feel free to explore the ankle range. The idea is we're keeping this thigh still in space, so it doesn't really matter if the knee straightens. You're using your arms to just make sure that that thigh isn't moving away from your body, so we're not missing out on that stretch at the end. Maybe some points and flexes, a little like ankle exploration. Try just one more like this here. How's the breath? How's the shoulder? Any tension you don't need? Okay, so we've prepped ourselves for our one leg circle. Check out your hips, make sure you're nice and square here. More support, arms down, less support, arms up, right? More support, leg bent, harder lever, leg long. We're gonna start by crossing the midline and circling out and around. And your goal is, can I support using abs, lots of energy through that supporting leg, especially in the moment that this leg is the furthest from center. You wanna really engage outer hip, inner thigh. This is just like your balance work. So if I was doing this standing, nothing in my upper body is moving. I mean, it is making micro adjustments, right? Of course, we're still breathing, so it is moving a little, but we're not doing a giant shift. So this is your oblique work. Try one more this direction, then we're gonna reverse it. If you wanna make it harder, right? Your longer lever, your bigger range of motion, your faster leg, less surface area. So some fun ways. Ideally, we're working without big clicks and clunks. It's not the worst thing in the world, but it means that the hip isn't centered or the thigh isn't centered in the hip socket. So we have to work kind of by investigation of proprioception. Okay, when does it click? What am I doing when it is clicking? We have to kind of find that moment and go, okay, oh, my hip is, maybe hiked, or I'm noticing I'm rotating my thigh. It's a little bit of detective work there with the clicking. And then you can bend that leg, take a little rest, pull that leg into your chest. And then we've got our twist, and then our last little ab piece. Should we do abs first? Let's take our twist first. I don't remember. We'll twist first. So we'll let that leg cross over and then open the opposite arm out. If this doesn't feel good in the low back, then you can bend. So when the choreographer takes a tangent. And just notice the difference from side to side. Do you find that you feel the restriction more like in your lat when you're doing side stretching, or more in your hips? Because that can kind of tell you maybe where some of the compression is, if you've got any tightness there. And then just gently rolling back here. So we'll come back to, we've got our left leg driving. We're gonna come back to our little ab series, in and out. So you can clasp your hands behind your head. Try maybe the opposite way of the last time, or the way you preferred to use less. And then I'm just gonna start with imprint position. My left leg's in tabletop. I'm just bending that right leg in and out. And hopefully I feel like I can be pretty lazy on that ball or roller. Just rolling, right? If I'm on the ground, maybe I'm sliding that foot up and down here. Every time I lengthen that leg away is when my head's gonna be down on the ground. Next time I pull my knee in, I'm coming into a little crunch. So coming up, everything kind of comes together, and then everything lengthens out. And just noticing that you're supporting the head. So nodding the chin before you lift, so that you're already set up in that nice cervical spine position. Do you feel evenly weighted from side to side, or do you notice that you're getting pulled more to one side of the hips? So good little check. You can usually kind of see it here. If you want to make this more exciting, then next time you pull your right leg in and curl up, you're going to reach your left leg long. And then lengthening back down. So can all this movement happen from the hip and down versus letting the side body kind of get involved in any way? So there's that element of lengthening. Try about 3 more like this. You can choose your height of your left leg. So maybe hip flexor wants a little more strength. You can start to reach that leg a little higher, maybe glute for a little bit lower. And just try one more like this. And then you can take a little rest here. Nice, bend your legs, take another little windshield wiper, just letting those legs flop from side to side. We'll roll onto our side here and do just a little glute work. So we'll ditch our props. If you want to use your block or your ball for your head, that can be a nice option just to rest underneath. Otherwise, you can do long arm or bent arm, whatever is going to give your neck better support so you don't feel like your neck's doing your glute work for you. So we'll go top leg long, 2 options. Bottom leg can be bent or you can activate both. So obviously the straight leg is going to be a little bit more challenging. So here is your side legs, what we did standing. So I'm going to find, it's not my waist that does it, but I'm going to find that hip crease. That's my float to lift and lower. And you'll notice it's not super high, right? So if I'm standing in parallel, I can't bring that leg up super high. If you take a peek at your leg, if there's any rotation, it usually means the hip is starting to rotate to the ceiling. So kind of find that hip bone, maybe even holding your hips, you can feel the front and the back and making sure it's square. You can imagine if you've got like a wall behind you, you're scraping your heel up and down the wall. And it should feel like almost in a way it like opens your sit bones a little bit. And if you go too high, you might also notice that the bottom side of the obliques start to kind of dip into the mat. So it's another little check is, you know, where's my hip, where's my leg, but also is my core on the bottom side activating. Let's try one more like this. Okay, so we're gonna bend that leg. Again, you can do long leg or bent leg on the supporting, and then you're just gonna kick that leg back. Now, as you kick it back, I want you to aim for further back than you think. So kind of go for like the back diagonal of a yoga mat. And the idea is I'm allowing the front of the hip to really release. Nice. And keeping an eye on that turnout. So our front of our hip a lot of times will overwork for our glute, especially if we're in a little rotation. So every time you're kicking back, you're going to think about kicking a little further back so that this can just release and your glute will automatically work, but maybe take a peek at that foot and notice if you're getting into turnout. And then if you've got your hand at the front of your hip, you're making sure you're creasing every single time. So I just want to make sure I'm not pulling my pelvis under. So here's the same piece as your side leg series, right? I want to get that nice crease through the front of the hip so that my thigh can move independently versus pulling the whole pelvis with my thigh. Do you feel some work here? And a lot of work on the bottom leg too, right? Yeah, nice. Try just 2 more here. So if hips ever feel really tight in the front or even in the back, or you're feeling like you're not neutral, both of these are really good ones to check in on. And then take a little rest. Nice. Let's roll onto our backs for a moment. We're going to do a couple roll-ups and then we'll flip to the other side. If you want to use your props, you totally can. You can do ball in between your thighs or in between your feet. You can also do ball at your feet, which is a fun option. If you like to hyperextend, you want to make sure you're squeezing your inner thighs together. But let's go for or in between the thighs. Let's just go for 6 roll-ups. As you're rolling up, let's emphasize. I'll kind of show prep version first, not too close. I'm going to grab my thighs and I'm going to curl forward. I can use that ball for sure if I'm working on my roll-up. Keep the legs bent. If we're feeling pretty groovy at roll-up, work this moment. So instead of kind of compressing to roll back, can you lengthen your thighs away like crazy? And then once your pelvis flips, can you lengthen your ribs away from your hips? So there's that same, and then let the armpits open. So there's that same nice lengthening so that, yes, I can use my abs on stretch. And you can feel free to stretch for the toes. If that feels good, relaxing the back of the neck. Did a lot of crunches today, so some decent neck work. So can you reach the thighs away, stay evenly weighted through both sides, and then can you lengthen, 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 lengthen? Halfway here. For more excitement, just going as slow as possible. Yeah. Nice. When you get to the top, noticing if you're a little bit rounded back and you're stretching forward, see if you can allow your pelvis, and maybe that means bending the legs, or tipped forward. before you stretch your back. And that's gonna allow more range of motion, more hamstring stretch. It's gonna also take some of the tension out of the back. So on this next one, we'll roll all the way down and we'll just roll to the side to do our second side of our glutes. I'm just gonna do a little flip around here. And then we'll do that side glute series. So whatever feels better on the neck, you can always switch it up. Know that, right, we're not necessarily symmetrical. Bent leg on the bottom for more support, for more challenge, both legs long. So you already worked the top side or bottom side, so I'm gonna be a little more tired. Floating up and down, right? Where's that kind of swimsuit line? So cutting right across the cheek there is where my crease happens. And then I want to just take a peek and notice if my leg is getting really high, maybe I'm turning out, or maybe I'm starting to use my waist or my back to do the work. So nothing from the hip and higher is going to engage. And just tracing that heel against an imaginary wall behind you. This nice feeling of just that thigh bone, like gently kind of sucking into the hip socket. So it's just hip work. If mid back wants to tense, think of just melting through the rib cage. It's interesting. We'll have like rib cage tension or neck tension, you know, something I'll brace to assist, quote unquote. If we can just relax and kind of focus on getting that off, you'll notice that you end up having a little more ease with the movement, actually. Usually like a little more range of motions restored. And then let's take a little kick back. So you're gonna bend the leg in. Here's your crease, right? So it's a lot of deep hip and core right here. And then when I kick back, I'm gonna think of kind of over exaggerating my reach back behind me. So a lot of times inside leg work, we feel like we're reaching behind ourselves. And then when we look, we're actually just underneath ourselves. It's like very interesting proprioceptive wise. So really dramatic reach back. Let the pelvis move so that the low back isn't getting grumpy. That looks great. Should feel like the front of the hip can relax. Yeah, and the reason we kind of bias this back a little bit, so here's your balance work, inner thigh, outer hip. We're just engaging the posterior chain. You don't have to violently kind of go, oh, squeeze my bum. It'll just turn on when it's back there. How are hips feeling? Like we did some stuff? Yeah, and checking in with that crease each time you come forward. Just turn right. Nice, take a little rest. Let's flip onto our front. We're gonna do a little extension. So for this one, we'll kind of play with the shoulders a little bit. So we're gonna start with the arms by the sides, playing with rotation. So if and you can just rest your head here, whether it's comfortable on one side or face down. So when my palms are facing up and my shoulders are rounded, I'm in protraction. So I want to press down a little bit through the tops of my feet, find my bum, a little core engagement, not super grippy, but just a little support here, protecting the low back. I'm going to hover my nose and I'm going to spin my arm bones out. So my thumbs are going to rotate out so that my palms face down. And that's my little retraction, arm bones and external rotation. And then just lower back down, rest your cheek the other direction. Let your shoulders slump. Find a bit of glute and a bit of core. Hover head to center. And then floating the arms just at hip height. Rotate the arm bones out. So you're spinning the thumbs out. So that's a combination of, take a little rest here, rotation in the arm bone and shoulder blades retracting a bit. So when you add your extension on this next one, spin the arms out first. Now I'm gonna float my chest gently forward as my shoulder blades retract. And then I'm gonna lower back down and flip sides. And we'll try that again. So I'll show this seated too, just so it's a little clearer. So when I'm protracted, my shoulder blades are spread, my shoulders are rounded. I'm gonna spin my arm bones out. So that's just setting my arm bones. Then when I come into retraction, it's a lift up and my shoulder blades draw together again. And that's gonna allow for a little bit more height in our extension. So if you've got like a clasp behind, or you can think of like your sports bra racer back feeling. Yeah, nice. So that lifts us up off the mat. Try just 2 more like this. Glutes and core are going to protect the low back. So if it feels like it goes right away to the low back, check in and notice, is the posterior chain on? One more here. Yeah, and just gazing towards, kind of gently towards the front of your mat. Yeah, lovely. And then you can just carefully bring your hands towards your shoulders, press back. We'll take a child's pose here. Knees together can be really nice for low back. Knees wide can be really nice for hips. We'll take about 3 breaths in this child's pose. A little counter moment here. Nice, and then just gently coming back up. Let's come to hands and knees. So we're gonna combine both the hips and the arms. And we usually start with this guy, but we're gonna finish with this one. So bird dog. So finding that same piece of really pushing out of the shoulders that you felt before, where the activation comes all the way from the wrist to the shoulder. And then that supporting hip that you just worked quite a bit. We're gonna go into bird dog. You can either touch or you can float, but hold for like a full breath cycle. Can you reactivate? So pushing down through that supporting arm and through the hip, and then create so much space that it's like these limbs almost can't touch the ground because there's so much space out of the supporting limbs. So I'm gonna find my either tapping or floating, but think of, can you push and move the whole spine away from the ground so strongly with that outer hip and that shoulder that when the limbs come back in, it's almost like they could hover. So there's a ton of space to bring the limbs back in. Does that kind of make sense? So it's almost like you're gonna work even harder on the return to create space. Yeah, nice. We'll do 4 more. So 1 more each way, take your time. Here's my active pushing out of my shoulder, outer hip, just like in your standing balance, so that literally these limbs could just kind of fall underneath. Yeah, and your abs on length, right? So it's creating strong obliques as well as shoulders and outer hip. Yeah, so nice and controlled. Just keeping the back of the neck nice and long. Lovely, and we can take a little child's pose after your last one here. Let's add a side stretch. So we'll sweep the arms over to the right. And then you can use the arms to push the hips to the left. So we're looking for a really big stretch along that whole left side body. You can always rest your forehead on your right hand or make a fist. So this is kind of a nice stretch to check in with. Again, where's that side body tightness maybe? Is it more like hip and glute? Or does it feel more like it's maybe lat and shoulder? And just gently walking your hands over to the other side. So I'm going to sweep my arms to the left and let that right hip kind of fall out to the side. I can support the head here. And then we'll come back to center for 1 more breath here. And then just gently supporting the walk all the way back up. So we'll do a little glute figure 4. I'm going to give you the option because we have the foam roller. I'll give you a couple options for figure 4. A fun variation that you can try is doing, so we have our seated figure 4. So I'm going to take it back 1 step, I guess. So we've got figure 4. What's nice about this one is it's really nice to be able to sort of see and feel if your weight is even in your hips. Right, so this can be a nice variation to go, oh, I really like to like lean or hike my hip. So this is a nice one that you can increase the tension by pushing more. If you wanted to take this onto your foam roller, you would sit on your roller. So I'd just be, okay, bum on my roller. I'd work out the glute. So this is like a little bit more of like a fascial release. If your glute is super, super tight, right, asterisk, then I don't even need to cross my leg. I can simply lean. So if I want my right glute to get the work, I'm going to find this spot. And I want to find it between my sit bone and my hip bone and my hip bone and my PSIS. So I'm looking for the meaty middle. It's not a super huge range, but I can lean and I can kind of work it out a little bit. If I want more, this is where I would go into my figure 4. So I would cross the same leg as the hip I'm doing. So if I'm gonna have my right leg on, I'm doing my right glute. If I've got my left hip, I'm doing my left glute. And I can lean back and use my arms for support. So here's where a reverse tabletop suddenly becomes a really important exercise for range of motion and mobility, right? You can feel how I need the range in my shoulders. So there's that retraction. And I also need the strength. So this is a more exciting version. If you're like, oh, I hate all of these, you can also take your figure 4 on the ground. It's always open as an option. And you'll notice, right, you can kind of play with where in the bum it's feeling super tight. And depending on the density and the volume of your foam roller, if it's a really soft one that's not super big, you might find it's different than you've got a bigger volume roller with more density. So you can adjust. Sometimes the Franklin balls or different melt balls can be nice too for this, the bigger ones. And then when you're ready, so any of those variations, so you can just simply come back to if you just want to do your seated, or if you want to lie on the ground and just cross your left leg over. If you're doing it on your foam roller and you're like, ooh, this glute's really tight, keeping the legs just stable and maybe gently putting weight onto it. You want to make sure you can breathe the whole time. So as soon as the breath is gone, it's a sign that you're pushing it a little too far. You don't want to kind of beat something that is only going to tighten it more after. So we always want to be careful with our rolling. And then if you want that a little bit more, you can cross that left ankle over. Right, here's your support, explore, as long as you're not rolling onto bones. Some kind of more recent studies came out about how if you foam roll as a warm-up, that's great. It actually kind of is the same benefit as doing a warm-up, which is kind of cool. So you could do like a mobilization warm-up, or you could foam roll as your mobilization warm-up and then go do your movement, which is pretty neat because there wasn't a lot of conclusive stuff about that yet, but now there is. Do you guys feel this? Yeah, what's cool is that the more we use our bum, the tighter it gets. So giving it a little release is a nice treat. The more we sit, we also get a tighter bum. So it's always releasing the bum. Yeah, and then either when you finish this one, either if you're on your back, just maybe hugging legs into chest, taking some circles. If you've got your foam roller, doing like a little upper back roll out can be really nice. Our low back's really mobile. We don't need to roll it. But if you start at the base of the ribs, so kind of just at the base of the ribs, supporting the head, you're using your feet to drive. Here's your shoulder bridge, legs, and just getting that upper back, making sure we're not rolling onto the neck. If you find a spot that you're like, ooh, that feels like I could explore it for a moment longer, you can rest your bum down. And whether, supported extension as long as you're not overarching the back, or even just a little side to side. So maybe I take like a little side bend, bringing the elbow down, or even like a little rotation. You can kind of play with that without shifting the hips. But just a nice little an elbow mobilization. And you're welcome to explore a little longer, but I'll officially leave you there. Yeah, so nice to see you guys. Thank you. Have a lovely weekend.
Time goes by quickly when you have a lot of choice.